This is for the people who have us as their number one channel on their YouTube Wrapped. Much appreciated. Starting off with the S tier, it's always Chase, Puka, JSN. The reason I like Chase this week is the over-under of this game against the Bills. It's like 53.5 points. Should be the highest scoring game of the week. I like Puka Nakua because I think in the second half, they don't care if they're winning by 10. They're going to go out there. They're going to let Stafford sling it because they're trying to give him the MVP. And I'm going to have JSN last. I think that he's incredible. He's actually averaging more points per game than the other two players so far this year. But I'm afraid this game in Atlanta actually gets out of hand and they can just run the ball in the second half. And that's what Seattle's willing to do. Now, moving over to our A tier. I don't care if you put Pickens ahead of Lamb ahead of Pickens. Right now, they're both like higher, lower 80.5 receiving yards on Underdog Fantasy. They project out very similarly. Pickens has been the better guy so far this year. Lamb had the better week last week. Ultimately, if you're looking at the target volume, you've actually seen CeeDee Lamb with 0.2 targets per game more. So there's not a really big difference between the two guys. And then with Rashee Rice, he is actually the wide receiver one in fantasy in points per game. But I'm going to have him down here at 6 this week because I don't love the matchup against the Houston Texans. This is typically an offense that projects to score a ton of points with the Kansas City Chiefs. However, it's a really tough matchup against the Texans defense, limiting the Chiefs to an implied team total of only 22.5, which we'll talk about Jefferson later, but the Vikings project to score the same amount of points. And also, obviously, Houston has a top corner that Rice is going to have to go up against. Now, the biggest surprise with these rankings is going to be Jameson Williams. And I understand that I have never ranked Jameson higher than like wide receiver 20. But here's the thing. You're going up against the Dallas Cowboys. You project to be the second highest scoring offense in the league this week, only behind the Buffalo Bills. And there's no Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's no Sam Laporta. So they're going to have to lean on you heavily. So if you actually look at my rankings on the week, I have Jahmyr Gibbs as my number one overall player this week. And I have JMO here out wide receiver 7. Like he is currently higher, lower 83.5 receiving yards on Underdog, where Rashee Rice is higher, lower 68.5 receiving yards on Underdog. So if anything, the projections would have Jameson Williams higher than this. Now, of course, if you think that's crazy, by all means, go to Underdog Fantasy. You can find the link in the description in the comment section. Code FLOCK will get you $100 out of your account after you play your first 5. It'll get you a gimme Jahmyr Gibbs pick, higher, lower, half a total yard for tonight's game, and it'll get you free questions for our live streams. And Underdog is available in almost every state. Now, moving over to Devante Adams. With Adams, he is currently averaging 17.1 points per game, all coming with touchdowns, but very easily the touchdown could be there this week against the Arizona Cardinals in a very good matchup. I am starting Nico Collins as the wide receiver 1 to my own fantasy team this week. Gonna be honest with you, don't love the matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Texans project to be one of the worst offenses in the league, but I honestly think that you just kind of have to roll with Nico. Now, I was going to chicken out and I was going to make a big show and put Justin Jefferson at like wide receiver 17, 18 this week. But I just got to be a man and put him where I actually think he belongs. Justin Jefferson's going to be our wide receiver 10. And I am doing this full well understanding, full well knowing how bad Justin Jefferson and JJ McCarthy have been so far this year. Jefferson is the wide receiver 26 in points per game. Justin Jefferson has one game this season with 20 or more points, and Justin Jefferson's coming off a game where he just had 4 receiving yards. Trust me, I get it. I have eyes. I play fantasy football just like y'all do. But here's the thing. Still an incredibly talented player. Sportsbooks are currently projecting out the Minnesota Vikings to score the same amount of points as the Kansas City Chiefs this week, to score more points than the Houston Texans, to score more points than the Saints, more points than the Dolphins. So if the Vikings project to score more points than the New Orleans Saints this week, how am I going to put Jefferson behind Olave? Side note here with Olave in London for our next 2 rankings. Both of them missed practice on Wednesday. I'm going to update these rankings on flockfantasy.com pretty much every single day. And I'll update with y'all on YouTube later in the week if we need to make any adjustments with these injuries. AJ Brown will be our next option. If you are looking at Brown, he has been much better back-to-back games with him finishing as the top 5 wide receiver on the week, while at the same time he's had 3 straight games with double-digit targets, looking like vintage AJ Brown. T. Higgins will be our next name. Whit Higgins hasn't been incredible this year, but now you get Joe Burrow back in, and this matchup against the Buffalo Bills is projected out to be like the highest scoring game of the week. Then looking at Jalen Waddle, I have Waddle on my own team. I'm going to be starting him. I'm not too concerned with the matchup playing against the New York Jets. This game does have the Miami Dolphins slightly favored. And then Igbuka as our wide receiver 16. It's a very good offense. He's a very good player. He has been much worse in fantasy as of late, where he's had 3 straight games with fewer than 10 fantasy points. And over the past 7 weeks, he has only scored 10 fantasy points a single time. So obviously he is falling. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, though, especially now that he's another week removed from that hamstring. And I don't know. I'm making this ranking under the assumption that Mike Evans isn't going to play. Now, of course, if Mike Evans plays, then we'll have to make adjustments. Now, moving over to Devante Smith. With Smith, just 13.2 fantasy points per game. Yes, A.J. Brown's been more so the guy as of late. I mean, but if you go back to halfway through the year, Devante Smith had been the wide receiver 1 here in Philly by a comfortable margin. Now, Zay Flowers, this ranking's insane because Flowers has not scored a touchdown since week 1. Zay Flowers has been garbage. But he is averaging more targets per game, more receptions per game, and more receiving yards per game this season than he did last year. Do we think Lamar Jackson's going to continue to be the worst quarterback in the NFL every week going into the future? Probably not. Then the Washington guys, I'm going to rank here at 19 and 20 under the assumption that you have Marcus Mariota as their quarterback. If instead you actually had Jaden Daniels, then in that case, both of these wide receivers would be moving up to being C-tier options. And then Michael Pittman Jr. as well as Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce has actually been much better over the past 4 weeks. The reason I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt here to Pittman over Pierce is we just have such a strong sample and such a large sample of Michael Pittman Jr. being the wide receiver 1 in Indianapolis, not only earlier this season, but of course, dating back over the past few years now as well. Now, moving over to our E tier, we are going to have Christian Watson, where Watson has been pretty damn good, to be honest with you. Like, if we go through and look at this, over the past 3 weeks, he's had 5, 7, and 10 targets. That's trending in the right direction. If you look at the underlying efficiency, he's averaging 2.4 yards per route run and a 19.8% team target share. That target share is higher than any mark that he's had in his NFL career. Then the matchup against Chicago, we're not super concerned with. You do have the Packers favored by about 6.5 points in this game. Moving over to Courtland Sutton. Sutton's in a fine spot. I do want to stand by. I think that he is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. One small hesitation that you could have is possibly this game is so out of hand that the Denver Broncos are able to just run the ball consistently against the Raiders. And then looking at DK Metcalf, I am sadly going to have to start DK Metcalf on my own fantasy team this week. I do not feel good about it at all, knowing that this offense projects to be one of the worst in the league with the banged up Aaron Rodgers. Metcalf hasn't had consistent target volume and hasn't been any good. Ladd McConkey, I think we can't put higher than like high-end wide receiver 3 under the assumption that Trey Lance is the starting quarterback. Now, of course, if Justin Herbert's a starter, you'd rather have Ladd McConkey ahead of a lot of these other guys. But at the time of this recording, I'm going to make the assumption that Lance will be starting this week. And with Ladd McConkey, it's a really tough matchup. Now, of course, what we saw with Trey Lance starting this past week, or not starting, but getting some game action, is when he was in there, they were running the ball over and over and over. It didn't matter if it was like 3rd and 13. They were giving it to Kamani Vidal, and somehow that man was picking up first downs. We'll throw the Arizona Cardinals wide receivers here just because it's impossible for me to rank them right now. I don't know if Marvin Harrison's going to play. He did not practice on Wednesday, but if Marv does end up playing, I'd probably put him near the top of this tier. And if Marv does not end up playing, I'd probably put Michael Wilson at the top of this tier. But if Marv plays, don't start Michael Wilson. Jacoby Myers looks like he is the wide receiver 1 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Parker Washington misses, then all of a sudden you're going to be a little bit more excited about both Jacoby as well as Brian Thomas. Romeo Doubs will throw here. Obviously, you're going to have to monitor the Jaden Reed situation, but it does appear that Doubs is very clearly the wide receiver 2 behind Christian Watson. I mean, even accounting for that random game in which Romeo Doubs scored a bunch of touchdowns. Now, I know it seems crazy that we are ranking Brian Thomas here, and Brian Thomas has been absolutely horrendous. Brian Thomas, so far this season, is the wide receiver 47 in points per game. This dude has scored 10 fantasy points 3 times this season. He has scored more than 12 fantasy points once. He's finished as a top 30 wide receiver 1 time. That is how bad he is. God knows what reason the projections still like him. Like, currently on Underdog Fantasy, they have him higher, lower 51.5 receiving yards. That's like 15 more yards than what you have with your next option in Troy Franklin. And we'll throw Franklin here. Obviously, Franklin was very disappointing this past week, but if you look at the 5 weeks before that, he had the consistent target volume. Adonai Mitchell will be our next wide receiver. I do want to say that he is the wide receiver 1 for the New York Jets. Good matchup. Doesn't appear that Garrett Wilson is back just yet. And unlike John Mechie last week, where we had him as like wide receiver 50 and we weren't super excited about it, here for Adonai Mitchell, you can at least come through and say, I don't know. He has some juice. He was a good prospect coming out of school, and he's still incredibly young as well. Then yes, Rome Odunze is going to be this low in our rankings. Now, I completely understand you coming through and saying, Mason, this is clownish. You were so high on Rome early in the year. And yeah, early in the year, Rome Odunze was a top 6 wide receiver through the first month. Since then, he has scored 5, 18, 0, 20, 6, 8, and 2 fantasy points. And this matchup here against the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay is a tough one, where the Bears are 6.5 point dogs, and they currently project to score fewer points than the New York Jets. Khalil Shakir will be our next name. Shakir gave you 0 points this past week, 17 the week before, and pretty much 0 the week before that. No floor whatsoever. The only positive thing that you could possibly say is he has a good matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals in an offense that projects to score the most points in the league. Xavier Worthy, tough matchup. Maybe Rice draws the top corner here, and that frees up Worthy a bit, but I wouldn't bank on it. Worthy isn't even averaging 10 fantasy points per game. And while Chris Godwin is trending in the right direction for sure, don't get me wrong, Godwin's averaging 6.2 fantasy points per game right now. So very difficult to tell anybody to start Godwin. I will say the Bucs project to score a lot of points, and Godwin's playing more than he has all season. So of course, Godwin is in play if you wanted to look at him. Now, Jordan Addison will be our next name. If you are looking at Jordan Addison, he is much better at the beginning of the year, but obviously ever since J.J. McCarthy's come in, he has been horrendous. Now, with that in mind, there is that outside chance that Vegas is right and the Minnesota Vikings are an average offense this week, where again, I want to remind you, they have an implied team total of 22.5 points. They project to score just as many points, if not more, than what? The Kansas City Chiefs? So you do have to give somewhat the benefit of the doubt to Jordan Addison here. Going over to G tier and below, I just need to be on the record. For the love of God, if you have any of these players, bench them. Please. We will be led off with Jaden Higgins, who's established himself as the wide receiver 2 for the Houston Texans. Projects to be a very bad offense this week, and Nico's clearly the alpha. John Mechie is the wide receiver 2 for the New York Jets. Yippee. Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen would be a lot higher in our rankings if it was Justin Herbert and not Trey Lance. But the expectations are it's going to be a rush first bad offense and a bad matchup with Trey Lance under center. Trey Tucker is in a garbage offense. Right now, the Raiders, I believe, only project to score more than the Tennessee Titans this week. And you have to play against the Denver Broncos. DJ Moore has been effectively completely phased out here, and it's a really tough matchup against the Green Bay Packers. Devon Vele does flash somewhat this past week, but ultimately, who cares? He is playing for the New Orleans Saints, and he's the wide receiver 2. Keon Coleman has had 50 receiving yards once this season, and that was back in week 1. Jerry Jeudy plays for the Browns. Don't start him. Chimere Dike plays for the Titans. Don't start him. Darnell Mooney, you can start him if you have no London. If London's ruled out, he'll move up these ranks, but it's a tough matchup against Seattle. Josh Downs, Burden, Shaheed, and Cup. For the love of God, look elsewhere. But I think that's all I got for you. I'm really, really hoping you do not have to start anybody in G tier or below. Anybody in F tier you can put out there, but don't be surprised if they give you 3 fantasy points. Then E tier and above, you can look at them as decent options. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you, and I really hope I get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.